Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Book Bites. And I am so excited. Those of you who have been following my journey for a while will know why I'm so excited to be joined today by Sasha Wasley. Hi, Sasha. Welcome to Book Bites.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. And I am also extremely excited because so many people have said, you need to do something with Sandy Docker.
I know. I've got a bit of a silly grin on my face, which is not very professional, but there is a reason for it. And Kate's already jumped in. She's also very excited. I got to meet Kate last year when I was on tour in Tassie. It's fantastic that you're able to chat about the snapshots from Home League, and she's keen to hear how we both researched the topic. We are going to get right into that, Kate.
Yeah.
Julie Bennett's here. Hi, Julie. Lovely to see you. Yvonne is here. Hi, Yvonne. She's read both of the books. That's fantastic.
Aww.
So ask any questions you want, Yvonne. But before we get into the chat, as always, just letting everybody know about the giveaway that I have going. For anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question, whether that's here during the live or if you're watching this back later, we will make the draw on Saturday. So anything up till midday Saturday Sydney time, you will go into the draw to win a copy of Sasha's book, which is courtesy of Pantera. Thank you for providing me with the giveaway copy, Pantera Press. And if you haven't already read it and haven't got it, trust me, you want to win. So leave any kind of a comment or question for either Sasha or myself. Helen's popped in. She loved your book as well, Sasha. Lovely to see you, Helen. So the first idea that we had to have a chat during Book Bites was last year when we realised you reached out to me, Sasha, and said that we'd both written stories involving the same piece of little-known history, which was the snapshots from Home League. And if that wasn't enough, when we got chatting, it wasn't just that we'd both written about the snapshots from Home League. It was that we discovered that the way you and I both found out about it was exactly the same as well. This is the bit that blew my mind. Sasha, could you tell everybody how it was that both you and I discovered the snapshots from Home League?
Absolutely. Well, I'll have to just imagine you sitting in your living room, but basically it was lockdown, so we were all kind of bored and watching a lot of television at the time. And I'm not a huge regular watcher of Antiques Roadshow, but I happened to be sitting with my family, just kind of waiting for life to happen during the pandemic. And it was on, so we watched it. And up came this lovely segment where a person had brought in, I think it was their aunt's scrapbook, which featured photographs and request forms and other kind of ephemera from the snapshots from Home League because she had been a member of it. And I said to my partner, gosh, wouldn't that make a great book? You know, that story of someone being involved in the snapshots from Home League. And then one of my kids piped up with an idea, and my other kid piped up with another idea, and I was throwing things around, and we're all kind of bouncing things off each other. And then 5 minutes later, we had a plot. And I went, you know what? I think I'm going to write this. So that was how I came to it. And now you tell how you did.
Well, I was alone, which is a little bit sadder, but I was sitting on my couch with a tub of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, I think it was.
Nice.
And again, not a regular watcher of Antiques Roadshow. Like if I happen to flick across it, I might spend a couple of minutes, you know, what's on. But I was just flicking through the channels, and that exact same episode with that exact same segment came on. And I was looking at it going, oh, that's really interesting. I've never heard of this part of the war. And I sat there thinking, there's got to be a story in that. I didn't have anyone to bounce ideas off because I was alone, but that's where I started as well. And I just think that's ridiculous.
It is crazy, honestly. And when I discovered that you had written a book about it too, because I hadn't yet got to your book, and I didn't realize it was about that until I was posting, I think it was a week before my book was coming out in July.
Yep.
And someone commented, so it was one of our mutual readers, had commented on one of my posts saying, oh, Sandy Docker has just released a book about the snapshots from Home League. And I just went, what? No, this is not possible. And so I immediately went and did a little bit of researching, aka stalking, and stumbled across a blog post where you talked about how you had discovered it. And I just went, and the part of me was horribly dismayed because I thought, oh my God, maybe she's written the same book. And you know, people talk about this happening, but it's never happened to me. And then I went and had a closer look at what your book is about. And I went, okay, stop panicking about that and just, you know, okay, she got hers out first, so kudos to her. But also we've written very different books because A, mine's in World War One.
Yep.
Your historical component is set in World War Two.
Yep.
And B, we're different authors, so we're going to write different books. So, yeah, but then I just thought this is actually really beautiful. And I think, you know, two things sprung to mind. One, the serendipity of it, just for two people to be watching the same show over different sides of the country and both be inspired to write about this incredibly beautiful scheme to help soldiers who were feeling that heart hunger. They used to call it heart hunger while they were at the front. And the second thing was, thank God no other writers were watching that episode, because we might have had like this absolute huge influx of books all about the snapshots from Home League.
So it's just you and I that are the two sad ones that watch.
Two nerds watching this antique show.
Yvonne has read both of the books, and she said even though the subject was the same, they were both very different and both incredible. And same with Kate, very different books, but both incredible stories. So, so we've got this situation. And for those of you who don't know, I'm in Sydney and Sasha is in Perth. So we have two authors on completely opposite sides of the country watching the same episode going, wow, that's going to make a great story. But then we go off into very different directions. As you said, yours is in World War One, mine is in World War Two. So what was it about seeing this episode of Antiques Roadshow that led you down the rabbit hole that made you want to set it in World War One? Because this is, I believe, your first foray into historical fiction.
It is, yeah. I've always been really interested in World War One, possibly more so than World War Two, because I used to write when I was younger. When I was a kid, actually, I used to write historical fiction. So I did a lot of research into kind of early Australian post-settlement days. Mm-hmm. So I felt like that was more an area that I already kind of understood and had a handle on. So that I guess that was what drew me to it. And I thought that I remembered him saying on the show that it had operated during both World Wars. And when I did a little bit of research and looked on Trove, I actually found some stuff about it operating in Perth in World War One. So I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to go with that angle because it's what I'm more familiar with and more comfortable with. And also we've got a really strong history here, that connection with Albany, where of course the first what's the word? When all the soldiers from Australia went off in that first group, and the word is escaping me at the moment, they all left from Albany, from all over Australia. They all kind of came and met in Albany, and they saw all the ships off. So I wanted to, I guess, take advantage of that local connection as well. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was probably why. What about you? What kind of drew you to the World War II connection? Yeah,
so for me, it's because I write dual timeline. So far, all of my novels have been dual timeline, and I wanted there to be a living connection between what was happening in the past and what was happening in the present. And obviously for it to be a living connection, the timeline dictates that it had to be World War II. I'm going to have to move away from that if I'm going to keep writing in those sorts of timeframes, because obviously even now World War II is just that little bit further away from the present to have a living connection. So, or maybe I just have to let go of the living connection. But that was where I landed, because I wanted this living connection, therefore it had to be World War II. But as I did my research, I discovered there wasn't a lot of information there regarding the scheme in World War II. Most of the information was from World War One, and it was a much bigger scheme in World War One than it was in World War Two. So the museums here didn't have much, and so any of the pictures that I used for inspiration on my vision board from the World War II was actually taken from the Imperial War Museum in England, because they had a bit more of a collection happening from World War II as opposed to World War One.
That's so interesting, because I found that it was really difficult to find information on the scheme. Like there was very little in Australia. I agree with you, and I had to go to England as well to get more information. Not physically go to England. I did. It was locked down. Obviously, I couldn't do that. But I did manage to track someone down who holds the YMCA's archival collection in the University of Birmingham. And she, what I said to her was, look, I understand that there was a magazine called the Red Triangle that the YMCA put out monthly, I think it was, at least during World War One. I'm not sure if it was also going during World War Two. I'm sure they had other publications. And they were doing a monthly kind of rundown on how the scheme was going. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, I really would love to see that content. Could you possibly scan? You know, I know I'm going to have to pay for it. Can you scan and send? And she said, unfortunately, those magazines are now too fragile for us to scan. So I won't be able to do that. And then she said, but I can pop down and just open the magazines and take photos with my phone, if that will do. And I said, yes, that will do. So she did that, and she took photos of basically every issue in the time scheme that my book operates, which is early 1917 to the end of 1917. Mm-hmm. And I was able to use all of those articles that had been written by people who were participating in the scheme, and letters from soldiers home, and just descriptions of what was going on and how it was working and all of that, which was incredibly useful. But yeah, I agree with you. Much more was available in the UK. Even when I went to our local branch of the YMCA here and said, can I have a look in your archives and see if there was anything about the scheme, I found nothing.
Yeah.
They didn't seem to have any records of that particular scheme.
Yeah, I went to my YMCA as well, reached out to them. I didn't physically go there, and I got nothing back at all. I'll come back to what the actual scheme was in a moment, because there will be people that aren't familiar with it. But isn't it nice when people do help you out with that research, like that lovely lady in England?
Amazing. And sometimes that it seems to make their day that they get to do something like that. That's what I found. It was so open and kind.
Yeah. I guess she's involved because it's a passion of hers, and to find somebody that's interested in that passion, you know, would be really nice. But yeah, we haven't actually covered, for the people who haven't read either your or my book or aren't familiar with it, what is the Snapshots from Home League scheme?
Well, okay, so I'll answer that, and then you can chuck in your the bits I've forgotten. All right. So how it operated was, they noticed, and I think there was an officer wrote a letter saying that to the newspaper, saying that the biggest problem that the soldiers were suffering from was not trench foot or typhoid or anything like that. It was heart hunger. So that sense of missing home and forgetting what they're fighting for, and longing to see their loved ones, and just, you know, waiting for letters and all of that. Of course, it was quite difficult to get the letters to them sometimes when they were in the trenches and so forth. So the YMCA was coming up with a whole bunch of comfort schemes. They would spend, I think it was £1,000 a week on paper so that the guys could write letters home.
That's a lot of money back then.
I know, that for that time. And they had their huts that were situated at the battlefronts so that the soldiers could come and get warm, have a cup of cocoa or a cup of tea. And, you know, even they would put on shows and things like that. They had all kinds of amazing comfort schemes. And one of these was the Snapshots from Home League, where they enlisted volunteers, usually civilian photographers at home, usually amateurs, who would be willing to, in their own home area, go around and visit the houses of soldiers who came from the same area and take photos for the soldiers. And often it was family, a wife, children, parents, siblings, but also things like, as you discovered in your story as well, things like pets and the new hen house that had been built, and all kinds of little quirky things that the families thought that their boys would enjoy. Oh, and then of course they got packaged up by the YMCA, who funded the whole thing. So if the volunteer couldn't afford to pay for developing or film or postage, they would get reimbursed. And then they packaged them up in little waterproof packages, and then they would get sent back to the front and delivered to their boys.
And one thing where we are similar in the stories that we wrote, because obviously we're dealing with World War I and World War II, where the majority of able-bodied men were out of the country, it often fell to the women to then be the ones to take these photos. And so we both have female people taking these photographs. And I think it's safe to say that both of our heroines are fighting societal expectations placed on them. For me, I've got Rosalie, who wants to be a reporter. And for you, you've got Edie, who wants to be a photographer.
Yes.
What is it, do you think, that drew Edie into wanting to take part and take these photos for the boys in the front?
Well, she actually didn't want to take part to begin with. She was an avid photographer. She'd been taught by her brother, but before the book begins, her brother is already lost at the war, and she's devastated because he really was the only thing in her life that made it worth living, because her father's awful. He's a tyrant. He doesn't know that she's a passionate photographer. And her brother was scheming to get her over to England because he thought that she could probably work in a portrait house there and, really get seen as a good photographer. He knew how talented she was. But, of course, when he dies, all of that hope dies with him. And she starts to not be able to even pick up a camera anymore. She doesn't, it hurts too much. She thinks of Aubrey too much when she does that. But the last letter he wrote to her said, you should take part in this scheme. It would be great practice for you. You don't have to let Dad know that we're doing this. And you'd be really good at it, and it's such a worthwhile thing. And I'd love to have a photo of you. And she kind of would have considered it, but of course then he dies. So after that, she said, I can't touch a camera. But he has a very persistent fiance who is still a good friend of Edie's. And she's trying to honour Aubrey's final wishes by getting Edie to sign up and do this scheme. And she also knows that it would probably get her using a camera again. So she, behind Edie's back, signs her up, and Edie kind of gets roped into it. But it does turn out to be the best thing she could have done. And do you want to talk us through how Rosalie gets involved?
Yeah, so Rosalie, her passion is to be a journalist. So we're talking obviously in the 40s as opposed to 1917 for you. And she really wants to be a journalist. Again, her father, because she's from quite a well-to-do family, which Edie is also from, Dad's not having a bar of that. He's happy to have her educated, but then she needs to settle down and find a husband, which was a very similar experience to Corey. And she ends up getting a job at her local newspaper, thinking that that's a stepping stone into one of the bigger city newspapers. And just the bustling matriarch of the town basically is the contact point for the YMCA, and she puts her onto it. And one of the things that Rosalie really wanted to do was actually go to the front. She wanted to be a frontline reporter, but it just wasn't a thing for women. There was, and it's in my notes in the back of the book that I wrote, there was like one American woman who was reporting from the front line, but she was like this trailblazer, and it really wasn't a thing to do. So Rosalie sees this scheme, doing these photos for the snapshot scheme, as a way to be connected to that and do her bit, because she's not allowed to go over there. So, yeah. Another difference that we have between our two heroines is that Rosalie is in her hometown doing this, in her home district. So she knows most of the people that she's taking photos of, or is at least aware of the community in which, they're operating. Edie's a little bit different. Edie goes a bit further afield. And is it safe to say that she is kind of thrust into a world of people that she may not have otherwise come in contact with.
Yes, exactly. So Edie is working as a school teacher. So one of the things that her brother did was help her talk her father into doing some teacher training before he went off. So she's done teacher training, and her dad's kind of like, oh, look, I don't like it. You don't need to work because I've got enough money that you don't need to. But, you know, maybe it'll get you out of this ridiculous state of mind you're in since Aubrey died. And as long as you're working in a respectable school. So she gets a job at a private girls' school in York, which is about an hour out of Perth. But, of course, in those days, it would have taken pretty much a whole day's train travel to get there. So she's a good distance from home. And this is for Edie a real eye-opener because she's never lived out of her father's home before. And she moves into a boarding house for respectable young ladies, which there's actually still a sign in York that says boarding rooms for respectable couples, still up because it's quite a historic little town. It's the oldest inland town that we have here in WA. Yeah. So that was where I got the inspiration for that. And she moves in with a woman running this boarding house who loves a bit of good fun, this woman. So she's surrounded by young teachers. They're all living with her at the boarding rooms, and they tend to have every few nights they have a few dances in the sitting room, just between themselves, and, you know, a glass of sherry here and there. So she kind of gets to have a bit more fun. And also because she's hiding from her father that she's doing these snapshots from Home League, she's working in York doing that volunteer work rather than doing it back in Guildford where she's from. And she starts to find herself in the homes of all different types of people. She's very middle class, and she's only ever been exposed to the middle upper classes. So now suddenly she's going among people from all different walks of life. And it is an eye-opener for Edie. She hasn't understood or realised the differences between people who are living kind of below the poverty line, or immigrants or Aboriginal families. And she's starting to see how the world actually works. And for her, this is answering some questions that she's always had.
Yeah, and one of those people that she comes in contact with, that she may not have otherwise come in contact with, is Teddy.
Yes.
And he's a really interesting character, and he is somebody who opens up Edie's eyes to, you know, possible other ideas and views of the world. Where did the character of Teddy come from? Because he's just a gorgeous character.
Yes, I'm a bit in love with Teddy. Well, one of the problems, and you would have encountered this, I'm sure, as a writer of historical fiction, with writing in that genre, is that we have a different sensibility, and it can be really difficult to comprehend some of the attitudes that were held in historical times. There was a lot more racism, classism. There were different attitudes to all kinds of things, and that can really do your head in it as someone who kind of likes to have a more progressive way of thinking about the world. And there were perfectly nice people who were deeply racist back then, and that's really hard to reconcile. And the way I got around that, I think, was to have a revolutionary character. So a character who was really forward-thinking, radical thinker, socialist, a pacifist. So he's actually a conscientious objector, and someone who kind of sees through some of the strictures and rules of society back in those times and is not scared to talk about it. So he's actually shunned by a lot of the people in town as someone who's got kind of crazy out there ideas. And for Edie, she's a bit shocked, well, a lot shocked by some of the things he says and does. And but at the same time, he's also answering some of the questions she had, but she's never been able to ask. And there's kind of a change in both of them, I think. He's become quite bitter because of the way he's been treated. And she is willing to argue with him, whereas a lot of other people are not willing to argue with him. They just want to shut him down. So, yeah, they change each other in a way. But, yeah, that was kind of how I got around the problem of that I suppose there was a blindness to some of the issues, and I really wanted to be able to question some of the things that were happening in World War One in a way that didn't kind of sound like it was all being written from a modern point of view. Yeah, so that was how I got around that challenge.
And you handled it so beautifully. And Julie, who also writes historical fiction, said it's so difficult to write about those past attitudes, and that you took a really cool approach to that, because to represent it as anything other than they were the attitudes of the time would be false, right? That it actually thought. So you have to present it, but how do you do it in a way that's palatable, I guess?
Yes. Sort of authentic meets palatable. That's the kind of clash that we suffer as writers of historical. Have you encountered anything like that in your work?
I have. Not so much with Red Gum River, which was the one with the snapshots theme through it, but the previous one, Wattle Island Book Club, I'm post-World War II with the very heavy anti-Japanese sentiment in Australia at the time. And a lot of people weren't aware that actually was a thing here in Australia. I think we're a little bit naive, thinking that we're not subject to those sorts of things in our history when we are. And you know, the language that would have been used when they were talking about this character, Tadashi of mine, you know, would be language that we would not say today at all, but they would have used it then. So it was finding that, how do I, you know, I don't want to use some of that language because but it is how they would have spoken. It was a real balancing act to try to, as you said, portray it authentically, but with some sensibility. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Exactly, yeah. And even words like, I mean, they didn't really say Aboriginal back in the time that I was writing. They would talk about blacks, natives, and other much worse terms. Even in the newspapers, you know, I use Trove a lot, particularly as a tool for identifying language that was being used at the time, because I find that you can run really good searches, really specific searches, and then you can search on particular keywords. And if those words are not coming up, then you know that they weren't being used at the time. So that's really useful. But obviously my publisher had to negotiate how that was going to appear in my books, because we didn't want to be hurtful to readers, First Nations readers, who would be reading those words and kind of feeling, hurt by that. So that was a challenge too. And it's kind of, I guess in some senses, we do have to compromise so that we're not being hurtful. Yes. But there's a lot to negotiate so that we're still being authentic.
Yeah, because you also need to acknowledge that it did happen so that we don't make the same mistakes again.
Yeah, we can't kind of wash over it and make everything beautiful, because it wasn't. It really wasn't. And I actually want to show the negative side so that we can see how far we've come, but we don't want to do it in a way that's hurtful to current readers. So, yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. Joanne's popped in and said, hi, Joe, lovely to see you here. Now, Kate has a question for you, Sasha. Yes. She knows that I am a pantser. Yes, I am, very proud pantser. She's curious to know what your writing method is.
I'm a plantser, so I'm something in between a plotter and a pantser. I tend to have an idea. Like I said, we came up with the plot. That plot completely changed ultimately. And the problem of the first plot that we came up with was that Edie was going to fall in love with one of the soldiers at the front. But I just couldn't work out a way to make a relationship form if he wasn't in the room. And I needed him in the room with her so that they could have a bit of sexual tension and they could kind of see each other's facial expressions. I just couldn't work out how, and, you know, I'm sure it's been done. I know it's been done because I was reading stories about epistolary romance, people that fell in love through letters. But I really needed to have him in the room for this particular book. And the only way I could think of that happening was he's either unable to go and fight or he's a conscientious objector. So, yeah, that was kind of the other reason that I had him being one of those. But, yeah, like I said, that changed the whole plot. And then another thing that changed it was the research. I was really lucky in that year that I was starting to write the book, a new residency popped up being run by the National Trust of WA. And they would allow a writer to go and work in one of our beautiful old National Trust properties for 14 days, which you could spread across a period of time. You can't sleep there because they're kind of National Trust properties. Also, who would want to sleep there because they're so haunted, those places, and I don't want to be on my own at night in a haunted house. But they gave us a stipend and gave us access to the volunteers that have done all that kind of homework and know all the stuff. And I went and basically worked in Woodbridge House, which features in my book. It was a great stately home of a family, a well-to-do family that lived in Perth, in Guildford. So I went and spent 14 days across a couple of months, just a few hours at a time in this home, generally by myself, because they just would give you the key and the alarm code and in you go. And I was sitting up in the maid servants room, which, is quite suitable because that's about how much writers earn in Australia. And I would sit there and look out over the Swan River and lock the door behind me so that the ghosts couldn't get in, because we all know that ghosts can't get through a locked door.
Absolutely.
And look out over the river and write. And I could also use all of the things in the house. I had access to all the rooms, so it was kind of getting a real insight into, that's how you do up your boot buttons and the little things that they had on their bedside tables, but also they had a really good collection of books. And they had the old letters that were written by the two boys who lived in the house who went off and died in World War I. So all of this stuff really informed a whole bunch of the kind of little things that went into the plot, and a lot of the time changed the direction of the plot. So whilst I knew where the story was going to go, I knew that she was going to have her consciousness raised as a person, and that something important was going to happen and all of that. I guess I really didn't know where it was going until I did all that stuff. But by the time I'm halfway through, I need to have the plot nailed down so I know where the book's going. That was a really long answer to that question.
I'm sure Kate appreciates it. Kate's a wonderful avid reader and very much involved in the
Yes,
reading.
I know Kate's name. I recognise Kate's name.
Yeah, you've seen her on socials, I'm sure.
Yes.
And I guess the thing for any writers that are watching who are, seeking publication and wondering about the journey, I think the important thing is there, whether you are a pantser or a plotter or a plantser in between, the most important thing is to be adaptable, because if something in your research strikes you or something's not working or you go off on a tangent that is just the winning tangent, you've got to be able to adapt to that.
Yes. Listen, yeah, you got to listen to that. Oh, you're so right. That's so wise, Sandy.
Yeah. We're going to wrap this up shortly. I'm just going to pop up the details of where you can find Sasha online. And you'll notice that there's more than one book on this tile that I'm putting up, and I'll come to that in just a moment. I've got two last questions for you myself, Sasha, and then if there are any last questions from the audience, pop them in the chat now. My first of my last two questions is, do you now watch Antiques Roadshow hoping for more inspiration?
I have to admit, I can't help it. Whenever it comes on, I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. But actually, I get a lot of my inspiration now from podcasts. So I listen to a history one called BBC History Extra podcast, and they do some really great deep dives into really specific topics that have been very inspirational. So I've now got this book full of ideas. So if you're looking for ideas and you're a historical writer, definitely I would recommend the BBC History Extra podcast.
Nice. And as you can see from the tile that I've got up there now, which I'm now going to take back down, Sasha, you've written quite a number of different genres. We mentioned that Snapshots from Home was your first foray into historical. You've written women's fiction, you've written rural. You have also penned some children's books under a pen name. So what is next for you?
Oh, what isn't next? No, I'm such a genre tart. Let's say genre tart. I love writing in all genres, and my brain will not be restricted to one. So I've got a contemporary that's sort of sitting there just waiting for me to find it a home. I have under contract a historical which will come out next year, and I've just finished the first draft of that. That one's set in Oxford in 1928. It's about an Australian girl who basically gets an opportunity to go and study at Oxford University. And I'm also working on a historical children's book, and I'm about to turn my hand to my first graphic novel, young adult. So, yeah, I don't draw, but I will be writing the script for it. So, yeah, like I say, so many things. My brain won't behave.
Well, then I'm sure Yvonne will be happy because she's read all of your other books and has loved them.
Yvonne. I know Yvonne. Thank you.
I gave a special shout out to dear Banjo.
Dear Banjo has got a soft spot in my heart for it, actually.
Kate has said this, and she's looking forward to the next book bite. So again, for anyone who is watching this back later, feel free to pop any questions into the chat, regardless of where you're watching this back later. And I can pop in over the weekend. Sasha, I'll let you know if there's any questions there that people have burning for you to answer. So please do that. And don't forget, even if you're not watching this live, you can still go into the draw to win a copy of Sasha's fabulous book just by leaving a comment or asking a question. Oh, and we've got a comment from Kel, who got distracted by housework.
That's what I'm about to do.
That's the beauty of technology and being able to watch it back.
It is, yeah.
And Helen has said that she loves all your work and True Blue was her first.
Oh, thanks, Helen.
A lot of love in the room for you, Sasha. Thank you so much for joining me today on Book Bites. It's been a wonderful chat, and I don't know if we need to run our next ideas by each other to make sure we're not again, or whether we just see whether serendipity puts us in each other's path.
Is your next one about 1928 Oxford?
No, it's about 1970. 1970.
When's yours?
And a choir.
Oh, cool. What year did you say?
1970s and present. So dual timeline again, but the 70s and the present. And again, that's because I ran into that trouble of if I want that actual physical connection, my historical has to come later now.
Yeah, that's it. That's it, isn't it? That sounds fascinating, though. Oh, I can't wait to hear more about that.
Now, we will in the next few months hear more about that. So thank you again for joining me today, Sasha. It's been an absolute treat. I am just going to sign off now, and we will see you all next time on Book Bites. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.